Okay, so good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to this MJHA New Books on Japan seminar. My name is Simon Avenell, and I'm really delighted to introduce our speaker today, who is Takahashi, who'll be speaking about his new book, which I have right here in front of me, The Translocal Island of Okinawa, Anti-Base Activism and Grassroots Regionalism, out from Bloomsbury in 2024, so it is hot off the press. Now, so in terms of format, what we're going to do today is Shin is going to speak for about 15, 20 minutes maybe at the beginning, outline the basics of the book. After which our discussant, Grant Jun Otsuki, will have a dialogue on the book with Shin for about 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, after which we'll open it up for Q&A. So I'm recording at the moment. I'll turn off the recording once Grant and Shin have finished their discussion, so we won't record the Q&A session as normal. So let me first begin by introducing our author and our discussant today very briefly. So Shin is a senior lecturer in the School of Languages and Cultures at Victoria, University of Wellington, and a collaborative fellow for the Graduate School of Intercultural Studies at Kobe University. And apart from researching on modern Okinawan history, Shin's also been looking at the global history of progressive internationalism between the two wars. And he's been looking at a number of Japanese early socialists and social reformists and their views and discourses on Australia and New Zealand. And one of his publications, forthcoming publications relating to this, I guess, is that relating
Yeah.
to this area, is War New Zealand and a Japanese Scientist, a trans-imperial intellectual network across the Pacific, 1931 to 59, from Asian Studies Review. And our discussant is Grant Jun Otsuki, who is an associate professor in cultural anthropology at the University of Tokyo. He's written on human machine interfaces and the history of cybernetics in Japan, post-colonial anthropology, translation, and the anthropology of ethics in both Japanese and English. Okay, so with all of that introduction done, I will now hand over to Shin to let us know about this wonderful book.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, first of all, I'd like to start this talk with like with my huge gratitude to a modern Japanese Historical Association, particularly Professor Simon Avenell of ANU for having me here today. And also I'd like to thank my great friend and colleague, Grant Otsuki of University of Tokyo, for his company as interlocutor at today's talk. So, and thank you again thanks again everyone for coming to today's seminar. I'm glad to see some of the familiar names now on the screen. So, hang on, let me just want to share my slides. Is that right? Can everyone see the share screen?
Yep, can see it.
Okay, all right. So today, what I would like to do is um, just a brief kind of introduction of my um, publications, this book. As Simon mentioned, Translocal Island of Okinawa, Anti-Base Activism and Grassroots Regionalism. And so today's outline is like this. So first, I'd like to kind of talk about the structure of the book. And involving the things like a background story, the chapter outline, research question, and the sort of the main argument of this book. Then perhaps one of the key like sort of the troubling term, or sort of the term that I need to elaborate more would be a translocal island of Okinawa. What is it, right? So, in the second section, I'd like to kind of to focus on that bit. Um, but nevertheless, instead of delving into context through a sort of conceptual, theoretical sort of discussion, I'd like to kind of um, introduce a how I reached this concept through sort of introducing a some of the cases, right? And then, so that's the second section. And the third section is kind of coming back to the first section, some of the parts of the first section, and talks a little bit more about, like another key concept that I would like to sort of highlight here in this book, as well as this talk, which is grassroots regionalism. So let's move on to the next slide. So like we said, this book was published July last year from Bloomsbury, and Bloomsbury has this specific series called Sowa's Modern and Contemporary Japan series, and from which this book was published last year. And though, like as often the case, if you kind of quickly Google it, like now it costs more than $100 US dollars, so like it's really quite.
Shin, I think you're frozen. Are you still with us, Shin?
Pricey. But
Shin, I think we
convexity
lost
apparently.
you. We lost you there for a moment.
Oh, okay.
You
Hang
were
on.
just describing how expensive it was.
Okay, right. Sorry, thanks. Yeah, that's yeah. So anyway, like the paperback version will be published and it will be like the half the price of what you need to pay now. So it'll be more affordable. So what is this book about? Like, so it's a book about a history or like a history of the development of Okinawan anti-base struggle between a mid 1950s and all the way up to, say, late 1990s or early 2000. And it is kind of loosely, very loosely built upon my doctoral thesis that I submitted to the Australian National University in 2016 um, to five. But nevertheless, for the past what, like almost 10 years, like in the process of preparing the this manuscript, I almost like significantly revised, rewritten, rewrote this manuscript. So a lot of the chapters in this book are quite different from a what you can see in my thesis. Um, and like in terms of the chapter, it has a 7 chapters. I would like to introduce a little bit later. Um, so, but nevertheless, like sort of key questions. One of the key questions, I guess, would be here um, about the notion of locality, concept of locality, um, especially in a context of a Okinawan activism, i.e., what I would like to kind of propose, I mean, ask here is what what do we sort of envisage or what do we sort of imagine, when we hear or like discuss Okinawan activism, right? And the second question is sort of related to this first question, but like looking at a slightly different angle, or like I'd say sort of from a bit deeper layer, which is a how this like kind of a sense of place, like a sense of locality or more like sense of place, how was it developed in the course of the history of Okinawan activism between 1950s and early 2000, right? These are sort of the big key questions that I sort of try to address in this book. And one of the main arguments, so here is the locality or like sort of the placeness, right? In this book, I'd like to sort of look at it not really as something fixed, right? So, but in terms of connectivity, right? Connectivity. So the connectivity is a sort of the key term here when we try to sort of understand what the meaning like the meaning of the translocal island. Putting slightly differently, what I'd like to kind of foreground in this book is that um, sort of trying to kind of get away from this fixated notion of Okinawan activism that is something pertinent, that is something inherent, that is something a natural, like kind of pre-given, right? This kind of the combination of locality and Okinawan activism, right? Instead, um, what I'd like to kind of highlight here is that this idea of Okinawan activism itself is a kind of the construct, right, through which we can see the involvement, participation, and the engagement of like different communities, different individuals, and different historical, cultural, and social context. Thereby, when we talk about like Okinawan activism, it is not like something, something we can unconditionally sort of associate with a particular location of Okinawa, but instead we can unpack like kind of the various different connectivity, like lines of connectivity, right, with other locale, like including of course, outside of Okinawa and outside of Japan, right? So this is a sort of key idea behind this notion of a translocality in this book. Now, I'd like to kind of look at it a little bit more of the content of this book by sort of delving into a sort of the chapter. I know the time is limited, so let me just kind of quickly go through. So in the chapter one, I discussed this kind of the concept of the translocality, like the based on a particular strands or like a kind of a genealogy of a like discussion on a discourse on Okinawan activism. And in the chapter two, it focuses a bit more on a early period Okinawan activism, like i.e., in the from late 1940s to mid 1950s. So one of the key issues addressed in this chapter is a how like Okinawans, especially city dwellers, the citizens in the central region, and also farmers from the different locales such as Ie Island, Iejima, like kind of coordinated the early protest movement, right? And that eventually was leading up to this mass uprising of the 1956, and then from which this you know the so-called Okinawa's reversion movement, Sokoku Fuki Undo, like was started and developed. And in the chapter three, this chapter sort of examines the Okinawan's like sort of the challenge around the period of its return to Japan in the 1670s, and like the focusing more on a sort of what happened after the so-called reversion of Okinawa, or like administrative handover of Okinawa in 1972. So like by focusing on the activism of the King area, which is like kind of the central region, one of the central region like of the Okinawan Island, and the challenges like against sort of prefectural governments and the Japanese government, and also this multinational corporate petroleum company was trying to sort of establish the CTS, the Central Terminal Station, where you see like massive the petroleum repository, like trying to be like constructed just off the coast of the village. And so like this movement is kind of is important in a way that it sort of fosters a sort of a deep sense of locality, right? Emanating from that Kimbei struggle. And then it attracts sort of the activists, scholars, other like-minded citizens from outside of the community. And then some of them started creating this society called the Society for Promotion of Anti-CTS Struggle, right? And later, which this society is transformed into another kind of the society with a slightly different aim called a Ryukyuko, Ryukyuko no Jumin Undo. So the residents movement of the arc of. And chapter 4, like examine the dynamics of this kind of, and from slightly different angles, focusing on the author, writer, critic, a prominent figure in the late 20th century called Shimao Toshio, whose work has a like quite a significant influence on people who were like sort of leading this anti-CTS struggles, such as Arakawa Akira and Kawamitsu Shinichi and Okamoto Keitoku and so forth. And in chapter 5, I looked at another like kind of like different form of the grassroots regionalism, a sort of by looking at the foundation and also development of the group called Okinawa Activist Community, that started in
Looks like
late 1990s. Yeah, in the late 1990s and thereafter. And then chapter 6 is looking at sort of individual lives of some of the key activists participated in this Okinawa Korea People's Solidarity. And then chapter 7 is a sort of conclusive a chapter, right? So so like this kind of the sort of the backbone of this book goes back all the way to a sort of a really initial project that I had when I started my PhD research, which is a research of this intellectual called Arasaki Moriteru. And so this is a kind of a short bio of Arasaki. And so like he was born in Tokyo into Okinawan parents in 1936, and then graduated like from the University of Tokyo in 1961, and joined this sort of let's call it like in today's term, one of the private sort of think tanks called Okinawa Resource Center in 1961, which was founded by a emeritus professor of University of Tokyo teaching a English literature called Nakano Yoshio. So through some of the common friends and colleagues, Arasaki was introduced to Nakano, and he started his like kind of professional career as analyst and a critic of the politics of Okinawa in the 1960s, from the early 1960s. Then a few years later, he published a book called Okinawa Mondai 20 nen, Okinawa Problems 20 Years in 1965, followed by Okinawa 70 nen zengo, so Okinawa around 1970s, published in 1970, both co-authored with a Nakano Yoshio and published from Iwanami Shoten. And himself like relocated to Okinawa in 1974 to assume the first lecturership at one of the private colleges in Okinawa called Okinawa University. There, while teaching, he like also kept on writing this book. So Okinawa Sengoshi, so Sengo Okinawa, Okinawa Sengoshi, they both published in 1970s. So like before he moved to Okinawa, but nevertheless, like the idea was sort of formed um, during that period, and Okinawa Gendaishi in 1995. And so while teaching and writing, he was also very active in organizing a various grassroots activism in Okinawa from early on in the 1970s. So he was a one of the kind of the founding figures of Ryukyu Kono Jumin Undo, like this resident movement of Ryukyu in 1977. And later he created other different societies, including this Hitotsubo Hansen Jinushikai and Okinawa Korea People Solidarity in 1998. Sorry, there is a bit of the typo here. And then at the same time, he's a really like the multi-talented, multi-skilled, very well-disciplined figure. So while handling these busy like other commitments, he was also a president of the university between 1983 and 1996, and also again 2000 and 2004, 2001 and 2004. So I just wanted to kind of touch upon this like life of Arasaki Moriteru because, like I said, this is a sort of the figure I was initially studying when I started my PhD doctoral research. And this book itself is sort of tracing a activities of that Arasaki initiated and also was involved. Like such as Ryukyu Konjumin Undo and Okinawa Korea People's Solidarity, right? And himself was a leader of these movements. And as we saw, he's written a number of books. And so now if we go to Okinawa University in Naha, like down the bottom of the library of Okinawa University, you can see a reasonable size of a room dedicated like to the legacies of Arasaki as Arasaki Bunko, Arasaki collection, right? And so this is one of the key, like the main sites for me to do like sort of archival work in preparing the manuscript for this book. Yeah, so the next like kind of talk about this the grassroots regionalism. So like I said, um, this idea of grassroots regionalism itself is a sort of the product built upon a number of different secondary sources, including Simon's one of the publications on regionalism, right? For somewhere in the introduction of the book. And the main, however, sort of the focus is, like I said, the kind of the tracing the life of Arasaki, and then like as a sort of not as a sort of in terms of biography, but looking at sort of connectivity, connections, or like the sequence and the development of the activism that he was involved. So when he first moved to Okinawa in the late 1970s, he was involved in this promotional society of the anti-CTS movement in the Kim village. And then, like I said, from which he created this Ryukyu Kono Jumi Undo, right? And in recent years, we see now a reprinted version of this, like about 6 centimeters, like quite a thick. The book, the reprint of all this, the pamphlet published by the society. And so the society itself is sort of try to expand a local activism, residence activism, environmental activism, inspired or grew together with in tandem with this anti-CTS movement with other locations, Okinawa, such as Ishigaki Island and Amami Island. Amami, though, is not officially part of the Okinawa Prefecture, but this society was actively trying to sort of incorporate, like, establish a network with these, like environmental movement in other parts in the 1970s and 80s, right? And in the late 1990s, Okinawan movement started Okinawan activism, and Arasaki himself also involved, was trying to sort of establish the kind of community activism, focusing on the anti-base movement, like with a activist with South Korea, right? So grassroots regionalism, in a way, is the kind of the term that I coined, sort of to try to depict, or like try to sort of illustrate kind of expansive, like the movement, but also not just kind of the movement, but also behind the movement, there is a awareness, or like a kind of a consciousness, about the sense of place, about the place to live, place they live. So it is not just kind of confined, my point is, it is not just kind of confined with a particular location on the island, on Okinawa Island, but in fact, they're sort of tracing the history of their movement, and what it reveals is that Okinawa movement has itself quite a dynamic and expansive, like sort of the history, though often this sort of expansive, like movement or dynamics is not really as visible as the things that are happening at a higher political level. But nevertheless, that's something we cannot dismiss. So so in a way, in a nutshell, this book, yes, it is about the kind of a historical development of Okinawan anti-base movement, but and then in a way, it is kind of a try to probe a sort of political subjectivity of the that underlies beneath the Okinawan anti-base movement. But nevertheless, my sort of approach is kind of to try to see it from in terms of sort of social space, right? What sort of social space they have created, and what sort of the consciousness, or like ideas, like, or thoughts behind that. So it is, yes, on the one hand, it is a social history, but at the same time, it involves a sort of the cultural history, or like intellectual history. Therefore, here I have put the photo of Shimao Toshio, who played a kind of pivotal role in influencing the young Okinawan fellows in the 1970s. Like about the idea of Ryukyu, or like a Ryukyuko, or in his term, like sort of Japan Asia. Right. So this is the basic sort of outline of this book. Yeah, so thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you, Shin. Okay, so now we'll shift over to Grant and Shin discussing the book. Maybe I can jump into.
Mm.
Great, thank you. I guess I'll start. I want to start by thanking Shin and Simon for the invitation to comment on the book and to participate in this discussion. I've had the privilege of learning from Shin about Okinawa when we were colleagues for over many years, and it's been a privilege to read sort of the the sum total of those conversations in a way in this book. And I approach this, as was kind of mentioned in the introduction, I'm an anthropologist of technology who dabbles in history a little bit. So my exposure to Okinawa, scholarship on Okinawa is quite limited. So I'm going to just preface with that qualification before I jump into things, that I want to sort of ask questions and raise my own interpretations about things that I found fascinating about the book, and then maybe invite Shin to elaborate on those and talk a little bit more about some of the other very interesting things that are discussed throughout the book. And the first thing was, as somebody who is has a scholarly interest in Japan, but had not really taken much time to think about Okinawa as such, This was a refreshing perspective in all sorts of ways. And one of the things that it made me realize was the importance of social space that Shin mentioned right at the end, and the politics of how to imagine space and place, and what kind of activities, what kind of activism that can lead to. And I sort of have two thoughts coming out of that. And one is it made me think that made me wonder what kind of spatial imaginary that they're pushing against. Um, because there are lots of ideas like Japonesia and about the Ryukyuko or the Ryukyu arc. There are multiple sort of alternative spatialities being offered by the activists and intellectuals. And I was thinking in response to what? And it made me think that maybe one way to think about the sort of more hegemonic spatial imaginary is, um, and this is oversimplifying, I think, but it made me think that maybe Japan as a nation state has been imagining itself as a kind of continent more than a chain of islands, and that it has been seeing itself as linked to its neighbors and linked internally in the terms of like an imperial state or a continental sort of empire more than an island. And what Okinawa has done, or what Okinawan activists have been doing, has been to reawaken, like remind Japan that it is in fact a chain of islands, and here we are, another part of that chain of islands. And one of the things that I think the book does then is to heighten the politics, or bring those politics of thinking in island terms or imagining space and connection from the standpoint of being on an island, how important and effective those can be. So I guess I'll start by maybe just putting that, offering that as a way to think about some of the arguments that you're making, and then maybe we can start a discussion from there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you, Grant. Yeah, I think, like a lot of your questions, and it is like right, like the right at the heart of a sort of the thought that I wanted to put forward in this book. Yeah, so there are a couple of the ways to answer your question. I think one way to put it is that in response to what is that the sort of like trying to kind of decouple a kind of idea of island from a sort of isolated, insulated kind of place. Instead, sort of trying to redefine it, reframe it, like not redefine, but reframe it as a sort of a place of meeting point, right? So especially in the in chapter 6, but like in other chapters as well, what I kind of deliberately sort of try to incorporate and I highlight in this book is how sort of the making, analyzing sort of the making of the what we today call Okinawa activism, right? And how it is sort of movement itself is not just standing by itself, but like it sort of exists in connection, in association, in relation to other activism. Say, like in chapter 6, I talked about these activists coming from, the mainland, but from the different walks of life. One of the persons I highlighted there was a Buddhist nun, and she, like was originally from a Chinese Korean background, the second generation Chinese Korean background in Kobe, and like through different encounters, she somehow like ended up being in Okinawa, and like to start participating in the founding of OKPS, whereas the other person was a former student activist, first in the Tohoku University, and then moved to Kanagawa, and then eventually came to Okinawa. So this kind of invisible thread right, is something that is like essentially involved in the making of Okinawa. And then the importance to highlight this sort of the social imaginary, as you call it, is that it gives us sort of the sense of collectivity away from, or like a kind of representation of Okinawa as sort of promulgated by sort of, for example, things like media, or like things like a everyday discourse that we use, which is often kind of has some, like specific or not a specific, very ambiguous sort of um, image, right? But we just kind of naturally, like absorb it and then use it, reproduce it. And so, yeah, so that's in the introduction, I kind of sort of radicalized that idea and used coined this term that with a specific examples, trying to kind of to highlight the criticality of this translocal island, which is that the sort of the argument that I made was that like the kind of the image that I like probably criticize, be critical of, is what I called a what is that the Cold War geopolitical reductionism,
Mhm.
right? Where through which like Okinawans are kind of Okinawa itself was the sort of the portrayed as a like Cold War island, or like island of bases, um, like, and then people are like those activists are sort of illustrated as a sort of fraction of the like the kind of the residents who are really angry, who are really
Mhm.
like sort of um, acting sort of quote unquote irrationally, right, or like emotionally. But no, that sort of a discourse is like something that I really ultimately trying to sort of
Mhm.
counter. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, well, I got the sense. I mean, I think my sort of reaction is linked to the very interesting idea of this translocal island, which is kind of a doubled contradiction, right? That it's trans and local simultaneously. So there's a tension in that word, and then that's doubled onto the island. And I think thinking about what kind of activity is inspired by living within that tension, both sort of in place, but also having to sort of create links and connections across in ways that exceed sort of the geographical,
Mm,
but don't necessarily escape the geographical or
mm,
sort of atmospheric or something like that boundaries of Okinawa or of any island. And so I think the tension that I was thinking about is something like it is an island. There's an immobility. There's an unmovability to the island as such, and there's a value to being there, I think, which is behind your discussion of how people become Okinawan rather than they are Okinawan, right? That
mm,
there's an element of travel and movement that has to come along with that. But also, what I found interesting is in the last chapter, this sense of like an affinity that people feel at a very embodied level,
mm.
right? That
Yeah.
also serves as connection. So there's things that are rooted physically in some ways, but they're that are in tension with, but not necessarily restrictive of
Mm,
these broader connections that span Korea, South Korea, and Okinawa, or
mm.
between the Philippines at one point and
Yeah.
Okinawa.
Yeah. 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 I think that's a really great point. So like, like I must add this this statement in a way that yeah, you're really right, and nicely put it. Like this, so the idea of the translocal island is not really like trying to be against this sort of a discourse of like Okinawan identity, or like sort of a kind of integrity a sense of integrity that is sort of fostered across generation by people like to participate and engage with like Okinawan-based politics per se, right? But in a way, it's kind of I don't know if it is successful or not, but like it's sort of an attempt at like kind of a accentuating in a way the sort of the kind of locality that exists in Okinawa, but like from a slightly different angle, right? By highlighting this connectivity. So the reason, like the very reason why I put this translocal island here is this idea of, like the prefix or like the trans is something that I kind of try to highlight here. So it's on one hand, there is a sort of understanding of the trans something is something go across, exceed or like transcend. But at the same time, it has also the meaning to kind of go across or like go across in order to be connected to something else. And this is a not of my own coinage. No, I was inspired by when I was reading a book by people like Akira Irie, who is a sort of a champion of transnational history, or like internationalism and international culturalism and that sort of thing. So, and he was people like him is using this idea of the trans something, transnational, translocal, as a term, like to for the connections, connectivity. So yeah. So like I said, this is a sort of a kind of idea trying to highlight a form of locality that is in Okinawa that is made, produced, conceived by an activist and the thinkers, but from slightly different perspective. That's yeah.
Now, I think I might add, like one of the possible nuances or resonances of trans here is also with the idea of translation, right? In this sort of Latourian sense, where it's movement, but it's also transformation in the and the creation of connection in the course of producing a something, whether it's an island in sort of its own complexity and its contradictions. But there is that sense of like people being gathered together across different interests, not in a way that sort of accumulates their interests or makes them reach some kind of consensus, but it's sort of this ongoing debate and struggle and difference and disagreement that sort of keeps going.
Yes.
And is sort of reinvigorated by contingent events and by things that have a long historical conditions, but pop up at particular concrete moments in time. But also because there's a movement to a particular place often that accompanies all of this.
Yeah.